We know what's needed. We just have not done it yet. Indeed, as some of you have asked when registering for this event, why are so few women in leadership positions? Why are women still not allowed to be part of decision making? Wouldn't it be possible to change gears to more robust policy on gender equality? Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this official side event of the high-level political forum entitled Choice, Voice, Autonomy, Women's Political Leadership for Health in a Fragile World. My name is Takala Itaya, the Director of Global Movement Building at Women in Global Health. I'm a passionate advocate for gender justice, and I will be your moderator today. Firstly, I would like to thank our host, the Government of Estonia, and co-organizers PMNCH, Women in Global Health, UHC 2030, and Global Health 5050, for convening this important conversation just before this year's ministerial discussion starts on how countries are advancing on gender equality, partnership, education, and all SDGs overall. There is no other way to put it. Trends in new policies on healthcare for women and adolescents are regressive. And this already underfunded area is being further deprioritized in the budgets of donors and governments. At a time where we have crisis and COVID or climate change and everything crazy going on around the world, we're deeply affected by what is going on, and it's deeply affecting the progress that's being made towards women's empowerment and even the basic rights. We must step up. We have to come together. We must hold each other accountable. So before we begin this amazing and exciting event, we have a bit of housekeeping rules. They will be also posted on our chat. But please note that this event is being translated in French and Spanish. Throughout today's event, we're keen to hear your thoughts and questions. There will be some audience word cloud interaction during today's events. So make sure you use your mobile phone and have it at hand so that you scan the QR code when it appears on the screen to allow you to submit your answers. If anyone is struggling with any tech-related issues, please just pop a message in the chat box and our event team will help you as best as they can. So I want to kickstart this session to hear from our different audiences and those joining us by firstly asking, where are you joining us from today? So you should see a QR come up on your screen. If you could just scan that, click on the link as it appears on the window, and it'll take you to a page where you should be able to answer this simple question. Where are you joining us from today? All right, I am seeing people typing in where they're coming from, and I see Mexico, USA as our biggest audience so far, but wow, it's incredible to see so many colleagues joining from around the world. Thank you everyone for submitting that. It's really, really lovely to see how we have amazing and different participants from all over the world. Thank you. So as that's coming up, we want to prepare for my next interactive question. So if I may ask, within 3 words, what do you expect we will cover on this event? In just 3 words. So the QR scan is also going to come up just now, and we're going to be keen to see what those 3 words are and what you're expecting in this event. All right, gender justice, woman, powerful woman, woman leadership, gender equality, of course, opportunities, empowerment, barriers. I love the way we have opportunities and empowerment coming out so boldly. Leadership. Okay, definitely key things that we will definitely be discussing. Thank you everyone for your inputs, which are very important for this discussion, and most importantly, for the actions we all should take. During today's events, we'll be hearing from women leaders across all sectors as well as youth on what are the actions needed to strengthen women's leadership, what can be achieved when we work in partnership. We are delighted to also be concluding this event with a new poem from Mumbi, so stay tuned for that. Now, I'm going to kickstart this event we all have been waiting for. I would like to welcome Her Excellency Kersti Kaljulaid, former President of Estonia, and the United Nations Secretary General's Global Advocate for Every Woman, Every Child, for the welcoming remarks. Let us listen to those opening remarks.
Dear friends, thank you for this opportunity to speak on an issue that is very personal to me. As the former President of Estonia and as the UN Secretary General's advocate for every woman, every child, I believe in the power, effectiveness, and above all, essentialness of women leaders. We are halfway through the time frame for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But instead of closing the gender equity gap, decades of progress have been lost, and women's fundamental rights and health are under attack. Women, half of the population, are largely not the ones making decisions, especially not women from low-income countries, especially not the decisions which very often do concern, actually, mostly or only women. As of today, just 26 women serve as heads of state and government in 24 countries. At this rate, we will not reach gender parity at the highest positions of power for another 130 years. Women are even more absent among health boards, leadership at private companies, and philanthropies. At the same time, women and girls are bearing the brunt of the global pandemic, as well as new and ongoing conflict, the ever-increasing climate emergency, and dramatic changes in policy that take away rights and set us back decades. These outcomes are not anymore limited to least developed and developing nations. These outcomes, drastic change in the rights of women for the worse, are now common also in developed countries. Crises have worsened health outcomes for girls and women around the world due to lack of access to essential health services and education, forced marriages, job loss, exposure to violence. Not all decisions today try to alleviate, but actually make these problems worse. The compounding crises have exposed just how fragile recent gains have been and how quickly advancements can disappear without vigilance, advocacy, and partnerships. Women are on the front lines at home and in their communities, but I must ask, who sees us and who hears us? There is a need for transformative action to ensure women have a voice that is not only spoken, but also heard and taken seriously, above all, taken seriously. Even women in the highest position have sometimes felt like, I speak, they do not listen. Is it something to do with my gender, my age? Let's be frank, very often it is. It still is, globally, in every country. Nobody is guilt-free. People, communities and economies will thrive when we raise up this half of the population, our women and girls, when we acknowledge the contributions of women, when we pay women fairly for the work that they do, when we, as a whole, show the value and inherent necessity of women for the society. We must increase access to choices and empowerment from absolutely every angle, in absolutely every country. The solutions are normally complex, but let us commit to a gender lens that includes the participation of women, especially young women and girls, working in partnerships and communities, governments, corporations and NGOs toward our common goals. This is the way to see true change. This is the way we can make progress. Let's be serious about the women's business globally. I'm calling on all men, women, boys, girls, everybody. Let's do this together. We will get a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Her Excellency Kirsty Kaljulaid. You know, unfortunately, too many of us know exactly what it is like to not be taken seriously and to wonder if it is because we are women. Your call to act together is exactly what we need. On this note, let me introduce the panel discussion chaired by our Right Honorable Helen Clark, PMNCH Board Chair and the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and known to many of you also in numerous positions. She is also serving as a global leader in sustainable development and gender equality. Over to you, Helen.
Well, thank you, Tikala, and greetings everyone from New Zealand, rather late at night, and welcome wherever you've joined from around the world. And we've got a great panel and a great session coming up, really going into a little more of the issues that President Kirsty was identifying in her video. We all know that we live in really quite shocking times. There are so many crises that keep coming at us, their impacts are compounding. At PMNCH, we talk about the 3 C's of climate crisis, of COVID, and of conflict, and all of them coming together are just having a very, very challenging impact on our ability to reach those sustainable development goals. And we are focusing very much on Sustainable Development Goal 5 today, the one on gender equality, and one which is up for review, as goals are from time to time at the high-level political forum in New York. Let me also add to the 3 C's a 4th C, and that's court, and it's the Supreme Court, which in the United States has brought down the devastating judgment to take away the constitutional right of women and girls to abortion. And this has sent shockwaves right around the world because of the capacity a decision like that in a major country like the US has to impact on decision-making elsewhere. So we look at all these trends and we worry about the Sustainable Development Goals, including that for gender equality. As President Kirsty said, we're just about at the halfway mark of the 15-year period for the Sustainable Development Goals. I was around at the UN when they were launched in 2015. Well, it's now 2022. 2030 doesn't seem so far away. And it really is time to get in a panic about the Sustainable Development Goals, because we don't want to limp to 2030 and not see very much achieved. And the problem with the compounding crises is that we are not pushing ahead as we would like to. Some areas, and we know particularly for women, children, adolescents, we've been going backwards. And as well as the same old challenges that just don't go away, like, for example, that over a quarter of women aged 15 or more around our world have been subjected to physical and or sexual violence by a husband or intimate partner at least once in their lifetime. This is shocking. Violence against women is a really pernicious blight against our ability to stand tall and equal in the world. We're not adequately represented at the decision-making table. Still, only around 26% of the world's parliamentarians are women. And of course, when you get to the cabinet and the head of state and government level, the figures are quite pathetic. Global health decision-making, let's mention that, as one of our partners for this event is Global Health 50/50. And in their report this year, they have revealed that under 1% of seats on the boards of global health organizations are held by women from low-income countries. On the other hand, 44% of all seats are held by men from high-income countries. Now, we're not going to get the best decisions we could from global health organizations if women of the world aren't there, and if women in the low-income countries, who are often facing so many more battles, can't get their voices heard. President Kirsty referred to some of the figures that come out of the Global Gender Gap Report from the World Economic Forum. Well, before the pandemic, we thought it was shocking that it would take 99 years to reach full gender equality. But since the pandemic, that wait's increased by about 40 years. So if we just let these trends go on, none of us are going to see gender equality in our lifetime, and that's not acceptable at all. So we have to act. Action is urgent. So today, this session, we're talking about choice, voice, and autonomy. All of these are under attack for women, and we have to push back. We know that gender equality and women's empowerment are absolutely essential for development progress. And as I said, SDG 5 is under review at this year's high-level political forum, and let's hope that member states who are speaking and participating will acknowledge that much more has to be done. So, addressing these issues, we have a great panel that I'm inviting onto my virtual couch for the next 50 minutes or so to help us understand where we need to go from here on gender equality, and to highlight the current and potential roles of women in getting our world back on track towards those sustainable development goals and their targets of 2030. We're going to be talking to Anita Bhatia, who's Assistant Secretary General for UN Women. We're going to be talking to Gabriela Cuevas-Barron, who's the co-chair of the UHC, Universal Health Coverage 2030 Steering Committee. Lois Pace, lovely to see you online, Lois, Assistant Secretary for Global Affairs for the US Department of Health and Human Services. Moira Forbes, Executive Vice President of Forbes magazine. Dali, founder of the National Gender Youth Activist in the Generation Equality Campaign in Tunisia. And last but by no means least on my list, Deanne Cater, Assistant Secretary General at the UN Population Fund. So great to see you all. Now, Anita, if I can bring you in from UN Women. Obviously, UN Women has a critical role to play in advancing gender equality. But tell us, Anita, what's worrying you right now, and what are the most urgent actions that you would like to convey that countries really need to focus on to push the gender equality and women's empowerment agenda forward? Over to you, Anita.
Thank you very much, Helen. And let me just say to all excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, how very grateful I am for this invitation and the opportunity to just share some reflections with you. I'd like to start maybe, Helen, just by providing a few important factoids, because as you said, this is the HLPF during which SDG 5 is being reviewed. And you've already laid out beautifully the context in which we are operating today. But I think it is important to share some very important data that has emerged from the review that UN Women, together with the UN Statistical Office, has done of where we are on SDG 5. So I want to share this, that one of every 15 countries is really, really far from reaching targets in at least a third of the SDG 5 indicators. And our report shows that of all of the different indicators under SDG 5, and there are many, only one is anywhere close to being on target. And that actually, interestingly, has to do with women's participation, because the one target where there has been some movement that we can feel reasonably happy about is the proportion of seats that are held by women in local government, which today is 36%. So we're not at parity, but it is an indicator where countries are making progress. Conversely, on every other indicator, countries are not making enough progress, and we do need very bold political action and commitment to move the needle on this. And we know that women held 1 in 4 parliamentary seats in 2022, which is double of what it was in 2000, but still is not enough. So when you ask Helen, what worries me, I mean, of course, we cannot have this conversation today without talking about the major pushback on reproductive and sexual rights and women's ability to exercise autonomy and choice when it comes to control and autonomy over their own bodies. This is an absolutely shocking trend, which requires strong legislative and political action from countries worldwide to make sure that what we are seeing in certain countries is not replicated in other countries. And that can only be done by making sure that these rights are enshrined. And I'm really happy to see that certain countries have now said, we are going to enshrine what are constitutional rights through legislative action. So we need more action like that, because you just don't know when the clock will start to roll back. Yesterday, I was following this discussion on Twitter where people were talking about how when Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale, nobody really believed that you could have that kind of a scenario come to fruition. But in fact, that is the world we are living in. And it is remarkable how fiction has become reality. And so we need to make sure that fiction doesn't become reality in other parts of the world. We need very bold action on the legislative and political front. The other thing that I have to say that really, really worries me is when we look at the fiscal stimulus packages and the response of governments to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we see what is happening today with the food, fuel, and inflation crisis, we have to ask whether the broad gamut of government actions taken to respond to the crisis have been done with a focus on gender equality and women's empowerment. And the answer is they have not. We have analyzed together with UNDP what has been the gender-sensitive focus in stimulus packages actions, and the answer is very little. It's very difficult to target women, but we actually need economic policymakers to take gender equality into action seriously as an actual target. And then the third thing that I think that we all need to be terribly worried about is learning poverty for girls and women, because this is actually going to leave behind an entire generation of girls if we don't act swiftly to end the learning poverty that many girls and women are facing today, so that they are able to play their full role in society. So let me just conclude by saying, Helen, that if I had to name the top 3 things, it would be the rollback on women's reproductive rights, the fact that economic stimulus packages and government policies don't sufficiently target women, and they need to, so that gender has to be top of mind for finance ministers as well. And third, of course, learning poverty. And lastly, just to wrap this all together, I would say if we don't drive more finance to the gender equality agenda, we will never achieve gender equality and women's empowerment, not just in our lifetimes, but not even in our children's lifetimes. Because one of the things that UN Women learned from the Beijing Review was that actually the amount of finance, whether public or private, going towards gender equality is simply not large enough. That's something we need to change as well. Thanks very much, Helen, and back to you.
Thank you, Anita, and 3 great sets of points there to focus on. Obviously, the sexual and reproductive health and rights, which is just so basic. Secondly, a good point about the stimulus and response to the pandemic. Even in my own country, one sometimes sees the responses, we will have shovel-ready projects. Well, Actually, that's kind of code for men's work, isn't it? Shovel-ready projects. And it isn't rocket science to include women in decision-making about pandemic response and say, well, what do women need to, be able to come back from this with their livelihoods? And great that you stressed also, thirdly, that learning poverty issue, because it's clear that millions of girls did not get back to school after the pandemic began. There were the shutdowns of the schools, a lot of disruption of education, and of course the impoverishment of families, which was a major pressure against girls going back. So you've given three action points, I think, that we can focus on. Can I say to the panelists, when you speak, please feel free to come in and comment on what others have said before you. So let me go next to Gabriela Cuevas Barron, co-chair of Universal Health Coverage 2030, steering committee, and an honorary president of the Interparliamentary Union. Gabriela, it's 3 years ago now since world leaders met at the UN and committed to universal health coverage. Since then, the pandemic's come along, and if we focused even for half a minute on the rollback in sexual and reproductive health care and rights, we can see just how challenging it is to achieve universal health coverage. WHO does define abortion as an essential health service, and it's being denied in so many places. So, Gabriela, as a leader in UHC 2030, what would be your key recommendations for advancing gender equity and SRHR as we try to push forward on universal health coverage? And what partnerships do we need to push this along? Over to you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you for the invitation to this very interesting panel. Now more than ever, ensuring that women have a seat at decision-making tables is not just fair. For many, it is a matter of life and death. We must do everything in our power to protect the progress we have made and push against backwards and unjust policies so that future generations of women and girls have access to more, not to less fulfillments of their rights. While we want to believe that the 21st century is the one for women's rights, still 2.5 billion women and girls are still being discriminated by their national legislation. Women political leaders have the ability, the power to do these changes by representing, promoting, and protecting the interests of women everywhere. Yes, only 25% of the parliamentarians are women. This is far from the parity that we need, but at the same time, these 25% of women parliamentarians, they are uniquely positioned to ensure that the voices of other women and marginalized communities are heard, and to empower individuals, families, communities, local providers, and civil society organizations to be at the center of all decisions, particularly at the center of universal health coverage, and especially by enhancing community capacity, play an active role in decision-making and accountability processes. They also can push to make sure that civil society and community participation is institutionalized as an acknowledged, a formal relation for making recommendations and for monitoring the solutions and actions that follow. I mean, it doesn't have to be depending on political will. It can be a formal process within the political sphere. And of course, we need to democratize the process so that all levels of political leadership, government, and other stakeholders listen to and act upon the expressed needs and priorities of the people. Women leaders can also push for their countries to adopt measurable national universal health coverage targets and redouble efforts to achieve them. Yes, we can talk a lot about the pandemic, but perhaps we haven't learned the lessons, or at least not enough. We need to prioritize health in public spending with a special emphasis on gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and of course also at primary healthcare. Ensuring gender-balanced leadership beyond health is another area where women leaders can meaningfully contribute. At UHC 2030, we released the 2021 State of UHC Commitment Review, and that document showed that a large number of the barriers to universal health coverage faced by populations relate to challenges outside the health sector. This means that health actors must work more closely with non-health actors and sectors to operationalize their commitments. Women political leaders can promote an integrated approach, both within and outside health sectors, to systematically address the social, economic, environmental, and commercial determinants of health. They can do so by ensuring that universal health coverage is prioritized as a commitment at all levels of government and as a whole of government and whole of society action, so that people can access the services they need, regardless of their gender, but also their socioeconomic or legal status, health condition, disease, religion, age, etc. And by focusing on actors from underserved and poorly served populations, women leaders can guarantee that no one is left behind and that solutions are tailored to the context and the population's needs. The working conditions of health workers is another area where women political leaders can play an important role. After all, women make up the majority of health workers and represent a big share of unaccounted for healthcare by communities. By making sure that these women health workers are equal participants in decision-making and including their knowledge, perspectives, and participation, women political leaders can find innovative solutions to address the global shortfall of 15 million health workers and guarantee decent working conditions for health workers everywhere. This is key if we want to make health a reality everywhere and for everyone. Women need investment in decent work that protects our fundamental rights and provides fair pay and safe working conditions. Unpaid health and social care should also be integrated in the formal sector. Women political leaders can play a role in supporting these working conditions and paving the way for other women leaders to help balance the scales. If we understand that at the end, guaranteeing universal health coverage is a decision, a political decision, because that means legislation, budget allocation, accountability. At the end, it is about taking the lead. And I really hope that women leaders, women political leaders especially, can have the first word and commitment here to make health a reality for all. And when we go, Helen and colleagues, for the health partnerships, well, here for us at UHC 2030, this is very meaningful because we need to align advocacy and accountability efforts and unite behind the common goal to achieve universal health coverage. If we are able to guarantee health for all, then we are going to be able to achieve or advance at the other sustainable development goals. A multi-stakeholder approach helps us identify shared principles, clarify roles, and develop or strengthen guidance and tools to support more effective and coherent actions. We are going to have the next year in 2023, the UN high-level meeting on UHC, and this will offer an excellent opportunity to get universal health coverage on track and to ensure prioritization of investment in strengthening health systems that leaves no one health behind. All health sectors and all sustainable development goals can benefit from achieving health for all. Collective action is also the best way of ensuring that health system strengthening solutions are inclusive and relevant for different communities by involving stakeholders and shaping and contributing to decisions and actions. In short, we are stronger together. If we are able to work as a team and work in the same direction with the same message, we are going to be replicating, first, the need of having health for all, second, to be prepared enough in case of a pandemic or whatever happens at the country or community level. But we need to understand that without health, a family cannot live poverty. Without health, they cannot give their kids the conditions that they would like to. We can make the difference between life and death. And that's why universal health coverage has to be a priority for women leaders in all the world. Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you very much to all the panelists for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Gabriella, for your passion, which came across about we just have to keep at the universal health coverage cause, and the high-level meeting next year will be another chance to focus the leaders' attention on it. Let me come now to Lois Pace, who, as I said, is Assistant Secretary for Global Affairs at the US Department of Health and Human Services. In that capacity, and I guess all your personal and other capacities too, Lois, you will have been as horrified as all of us at the recent move by the Supreme Court of the United States. And I wonder, with your sort of global hat on, maybe talk a little bit about what implications you see for other countries and regions, and also for US foreign development assistance. Help us reflect on what we need to do to make sure that this shocking and adverse decision from the US doesn't ricochet around the world, spawning like movements by others who want to roll back women's rights. Back to you, Lois.
Well, thank you, Helen. It's always good to see you as well. And thanks to the organizers for pulling together this important conversation. Your question, of course, is a poignant one for me and for many of us. As you said, I have been deeply affected by this decision. I think that emotion is shared by many from whom I've heard personally. I think from other conversations I'm sure many of you have had in the wake of it. It really demonstrates, unfortunately, how tenuous this fundamental right really can be in the national context. And so I really appreciate the comments before me about how we can sort of prevent this trend and also sort of address it on the other side. I will also just want to say, before I answer your question more directly, that this isn't just about the people that we serve here in the US or the folks who are served worldwide by sexual and reproductive health and rights programming and policies more broadly, but it's about the leaders ourselves. And I don't know if we've been able to have that conversation in a fulsome way and an honest and direct way. I would not be here right now if not for this fundamental access to care that I was able to access, to benefit from in this country. And so it really hits home the path that I could have taken otherwise, the path that others might need to take who come after me. And it's hard not to see and feel this sort of development as silencing, as limiting our potential as women. Again, as women in the United States, but potentially as women of the world who can serve in the ways that many of us do. So our president has been clear. We know that the developments in our country present a risk to women in the United States. And so this is why he and his leadership has taken action here to protect the fundamental right to healthcare, including safe and legal abortion. And to Anita's point, right, there is a need to take very clear national action and steps, again, either to prevent this type of development or to respond to it. And so what we've been doing in our Department of Health is we've stood up this reproductive health task force. We've also made it clear that our job is to protect women first and foremost, again, who deserve and need this access to fundamental care. We want to address their needs and rights in terms of privacy and non-discrimination. We want to support providers in fully fulfilling their roles and within the legal parameters that they have at their disposal. And then we also want to provide access to medication abortion as is allowed by the law. And so we in our Department of Health are taking those steps to protect and provide for women in this country. And beyond that, are very clear on, as you suggested, Helen, the global implications of this decision in terms of potentially changing hearts and minds and sort of accelerating any efforts to push back against fundamental sexual and reproductive health and rights. I want to make two things clear, though, in the wake of this decision. So there's a question that we get about US funding, which you asked today. And there's a question of whether family planning assistance or global health assistance will be affected by this decision. And we need to be clear with everyone that this decision does not change our position and that policy. And so we know that previous policies have sort of put that funding at risk, but this latest decision by the Supreme Court does not change what the US can do or fund around family planning, maternal, newborn, adolescent, and child health, gender-based violence, and other important programs that we have been able to invest in and lead or partner on over decades. Another important point, actually, and it's relevant to this conversation at this time, is that it doesn't change the US's posture in multilateral forums and in our relationship with UN agencies or organizations, including Unfpa, but also UN Women, WHO, UNICEF, and others. And so I think that is a concern of people, that the US will pull away from being an important leader and champion of sexual and reproductive health and rights worldwide. And the fact is, we are still here and we're still committed to playing this important role and to partnering with many of you on these efforts, particularly in policy forums. And so I hope that that is being heard and felt by stakeholders. But look, like Gabriela said, we can't do any of this, right? We can't achieve UHC even without really thinking broadly about what the needs are, and that includes sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so we want to be sure that in pursuit of the SDGs, right, including SDG 5, but also other health-related SDGs, that we are keeping women's rights and sexual and reproductive health and rights at the center. This includes also really paying attention to the diversity, gender in all of its diversity, as we say, right? And important communities like LGBTQIA communities who are also potentially caught up in the undertow of this decision, certainly in this country, but I think arguably as this theme or these efforts overall are sort of pulled into further debate and question. And so I hope that this is helpful to hear. I also don't want to finish speaking without applauding the efforts of many champions of all stripes who are standing up for women's rights and access to health worldwide. We think it is essential to have to really point to instances not just where these policies and programs are being threatened or rolled back, but also where they're being protected. And we have seen that trend as well. And so we know what can be done in support of this work. And there are many people who are tuning in who are a part of that progress. And I'm hopeful that we can see the balance weighted more towards those types of efforts. And I want to thank everyone who is standing up and speaking out today and tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Lois. And you're right, the kind of backward move from the Supreme Court, we can all take personally as women, because it's about us. It is about silencing us, as you say, about thwarting potential, and reminds us, as you began by saying, just how tenuous our rights are. We have to keep vigilant and keep fighting. But certainly a relief to know that the decision does not have implications for the foreign aid assistance under this administration. We know how it's seesawed under other administrations, to the great loss or cost to organisations like Unfpa and family planning and so on. So keep fighting the good fight, please, on behalf of us all where you are. I'm going to come now to Moira Forbes, obviously from Forbes Media Organisation. Forbes has a Power Women's Summit every year, and has long made a point, and I'm sure Moira's leadership has a lot to do with this, of drawing attention to what women can achieve in leadership roles. So, Moira, tell us what you're seeing from your sort of media platform, and where we need to see a lot more progress on women's leadership and gender equality. Over to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Helen, and thanks to everyone for the opportunity to be here today and to be a part of these conversations. And these types of conversations are ones that Forbes has long been dedicated to having, around advancing opportunities for women around the world, and really drilling down on what are the pathways and the pitfalls to the top, and who and where are the leaders on the front lines of progress. And one way that we do that is through the summit, Helen, that you mentioned, but also through our annual list of the world's 100 most powerful women. We've been doing this list for over 2 decades, and it offers a really interesting snapshot in terms of where women are leading on the global stage, and more importantly, sometimes where they're not. The list looks at a really broad section of women, because I think that is where we drive change and collaboration, whether it be women at the helm of countries, women who are crisscrossing the globe on behalf of international agreements. We're seeing more and more women building multi-billion-dollar businesses, helming corporations, calling the shots in financial markets, but really importantly, they're also dedicated to advancing gender equity. And the reason why a conversation around power is so critical is that it's a greater proxy for a dialogue around the world and across all corridors of power, culture, and society around the state of women today. As we talked about, everyone benefits when more women are in power, when women in a position to make decisions, control resources, shape policies and perspectives. And all of the amazing voices before me have underscored that women have the power to move the world forward, and that power has never been more important or more needed. So where is the state of women in power today? Obviously, the world is wrestling with a series of converging crises that remind us how volatile and ephemeral power can be, how much of it is at play, and where imbalances exist, and how quickly things can change. So when we look at our power women, or we look at power with women across the world at Forbes, the question we always ask ourselves is women's power in peril, and what's the state of women's power? And as many of you talked about, for all the steps forward that women have made, and that the list has shown since its inceptions, in some areas, of course, we're seeing stalling, or worse yet, a step back in the quest to achieve gender parity. But I want to talk about some of the promising signs around power that aren't always reflected in numbers or statistics, or even just in the 100 women that we feature on our list each and every year. A couple of areas, because I think it's a harbinger of what the future holds in terms of seeing women rising up to areas where their presence has really been lacking. So in politics, obviously, women's presence at the apex of political power has remained anemic. But what we saw, especially during the pandemic, is that female leaders continue to more and more to be at the forefront of really critical inflection points, really critical friction points, and are offering an expanded blueprint for navigating times of crisis, whether it be helming major economic institutions or countries. And also what we've seen is, while we don't obviously have enough women at the tops of countries, heads of state and the like, what we are seeing is more momentum in terms of policy decisions, policymakers, and female political leaders who are continuing to rise to become and have the opportunity to become more formidable power players around countries around the world. Also, in the business arena, what's really interesting when we look back over the past nearly 20 years that we've been doing the list. When we started the list, it was really always focusing on women who were firsts. Oftentimes, power was concentrated in a really small community of industries or job titles. But women are leaders in once male-dominated industries. They're no longer outliers. We're seeing huge pockets of women around the world in terms of their representation, transforming industries, and really being at the forefront of making decisions that not only affect an industry, but have the opportunity to impact the millions of employees and communities that they serve. Also, when you look at business, while the statistics that some of you mentioned in terms of women at the CEO level or in the boardroom is still very disappointing, the middle is where it really gets interesting. The middle is also the hardest to measure. We're seeing so many statistics and research and data that collectively show, even around the world and in countries where women's power has not traditionally been at the forefront, we're seeing a lot of strides to break into the ranks, to be able to find new pathways to power that didn't exist. And the last thing I'll say about power is that women's influence is now being wielded across more quarters of power than ever before. Influence is being leveraged in unconventional ways to shape cultural conversations and set and shape the global agenda, and conversations like the ones we're having today. When we talk about power, we often look at hard power, and that's countries and currencies. But also we need to look at the ways in which women are wielding influence in really, really extraordinary arenas to be able to use their voices collectively to hold corporations and countries accountable in ways that we've never seen before. So if we expand our definition of power beyond measures of wealth and corporate might to include the formidable ways in which leaders are now wielding influence, there's hardly a void of power. And that to me is really inspiring, and that makes me very, very optimistic. And so if those trends have set the foundation and the opportunity for women to rise in the future, the other thing that makes me very optimistic is the fact that we're not only looking at the statistics of women in power positions and representation, but we're looking at the root causes. And this wasn't necessarily happening in such a rigorous way when we started this work in the women's space. When we started this work, it tended to focus on the research around why women were critical to economic empowerment and the like. Now that conversation has shifted to the root causes. We're peeling back the surface on systemic barriers, whether it be things that the pandemic brought to the surface, such as the toll of unpaid labor, or the conversations that we're having today on how reproductive rights are inextricably linked to all the conversations that we're having, whether that be in the policy arena or the business arena as well. And the last thing I'll say that makes me very optimistic, and that's been a critical factor in terms of how we look at our list and the women that we spotlight, and that is the fact that there really is a concerted effort now to pay power forward. And we're seeing women really, such as many of you here today, mobilizing change and creating solutions for some of the world's biggest problems. We've witnessed an unprecedented groundswell of momentum that in many arenas has upended traditional power structures and ignited a global reckoning around gender inequities. But it's not just the movements at play. We're seeing meaningful actions that are kickstarting what we like to call a power reset, and doing so with a sense of unprecedented urgency and also unprecedented community of stakeholders, not just women, but stakeholders, men, stakeholders across all quarters of power who are coming together around these issues. So is power in peril for women? The answer is yes and no. I am optimistic. There's momentum and a sense of urgency, and the power that women hold to move us all forward has never been more apparent or more needed.
Thank you, Moira. And listening to you, I reflect on the fact that we are making progress in seeing women move into a wide variety of leadership roles. I think the time has come too when we need to look at how women are using those roles, and if, as for example, a woman like Amy Coney Barrett, appointed to the Supreme Court, can use her power to roll back rights for women, that's not the kind of leadership I think women are looking for. So I think we will get more selective about what kind of women's leadership we want, because we want it to be transformational and opening up choice and opportunity for women, and not joining the forces of reaction which close doors and silence the women. So interesting to reflect on how we might explore those issues in the future. But let me move right along to Muhammad Ali Raduai, known as Dali for short, who is the National Gender Youth Activist in Generation Equality Campaign for Tunisia. And great to have you on the platform, Dali, or on my metaphorical couch, because we need male allies in the battle for gender equality. And I wonder, Dali, from your perspective, working on generation equality from Tunisian base, what you see as some of the struggles and challenges that young women working alongside you are facing on their path to leadership, and how young men can support them. I'm hoping Dali is out there somewhere, because I'm not seeing him join my couch. Are you there, Dali?
I am. Thank you for the introduction. It is truly an honor for me, an African Arab young activist, to share this collective reflection with this group of inspiring women who are shifting the history of humankind as they work and persevere. It is, again, a privilege to have a seat at this table, or your virtual couch, as you like to call it. I was born and raised in Tunisia, a country that reflects in its own patriarchal system a glimpse of the situation in the Middle East and North Africa. In my region, the political socio-economic context systematically excludes women and queer people in different degrees of oppression. 11 years ago, the Tunisian revolution happened and inspired my generation to speak and fight back when it comes to gender equality and intersectional inclusivity. And that's how I created Nafas organization, a platform that allows young advocates from the Arab states to exchange tools and resources and to influence public policies, private sector, and grassroots mobilization to build a more feminist and gender inclusive environment for women's leadership, and also for LGBTQI+ people to transition from a state of prison and even enforced death penalty to having financial stability and socioeconomic inclusion. Young women of today are more vocal than ever. In a context where little girls in the US have less health rights than their mothers, and I point to the right to abortion to protect women's sexual and reproductive rights. In a context where women in Afghanistan are being oppressed and excluded, and women in Ukraine are surviving sexual violence and the consequences of war. In a context where the first victim of climate change are women and girls with the highest rates of being climate refugees, we are witnessing today the rise of populism, extreme rights political parties, and radical ideologies mobilizing citizens of the world to hate and get divided in the name of nationalism, religion, and economic interests. Wars, conflicts, climate change, and post-COVID-19 economic instability are directly threatening women's freedom and political achievement. Simone de Beauvoir said, "Never forget that it will take one political, economic, or religious crisis for women's rights to be called in question. These rights are never guaranteed and earned. We will have to remain awake to defend it." To me personally, feminism is not only about gender identity. Feminism is about the impact of patriarchy on everyone. Being a man, a non-binary or women doesn't change the fact that patriarchy exercises a form of violence on every human life in different degree. Our role as young men or anyone else really is the same, to build bridges between international feminist communities, exchange resources, and empower each other. As young men, it starts by building self-awareness, acknowledging cisgender male privilege, and ripping the toxic masculinity conformity and norms off. And soon after that comes the understanding of the common threat caused by patriarchal oppression, and that no one is free unless everyone is. As young activists, we have been working for years to strengthen our communities and international feminist networks. The NGYA, National Gender Youth Activist Network, is an excellent example of an international community of young feminists empowered by UN Women and the Generation Equality Forum process. However, our activism as youth is frequently limited by visa restrictions, blocking Global South youth and feminists from lobbying, from networking, and even participating in international summits, conferences, or even joining workshops and opportunities. The visa barriers against feminist young people from Global South, to me, is the #1 limitation. It is the barrier that stops us from growing our organization and communities in a context where patriarchy is the most vicious and dangerous. Today, I chose to speak up about mobility for Global South as well, because it is a remarkably important challenge. Global South young activists are the most likely to be rejected by Global North countries, while they are in front lines of feminist advocacy against violent queerphobic and misogynistic system in their own countries. I believe that international support towards young feminists has to look like reforming the visa restrictions and offering us the freedom to build movements, regions, and borders. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dali, for your more passionate advocacy for the right of youth from the Global South to be able to move, to be able to come together, to be able to speak out and advocate at these key forums. And let's hope that among those listening are some who can give some help to that. And very pleased also to hear you quote Simone de Beauvoir. One political and economic crisis away from putting women's rights in jeopardy. Well, don't we see that? COVID was such a blow, really, that we have to recover from. So thank you so much. As I said in the introductions, last but certainly not least is Diane Keita, who is Deputy Executive Director at Unfpa. And so last question coming to you, Diane. Unfpa is so familiar with navigating the challenges which come with changing political positions around women's rights to sexual and reproductive health and rights. I was going to ask you the question, what is causing the most concern for Unfpa right now? And there's probably so many things, it might be hard to pick one. But where do you see the opportunities, particularly with respect to building partnerships where we can move forward despite the many obstacles in the way? Over to you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Please allow me to say hello from Natalia from Bellagio and the World Economic Forum. She gave you big hugs. And for myself, last time I met you, it was the Chief Executive Board in Rome, and your congratulating word. I will start by the conclusion, if you allow me. Speak up, walk the talk, just like you're doing. And I think we need to continue to build on gender diversity, inclusivity, and intergenerational equity. From the Gen Z of today to the Gen X to the millennial, the intergenerational equity is very important. Now, what is worrying me? It's so big that I don't even know. I know you don't want me to say a lot, but let me start just by a very quick example. Every year during the rainy season, Mozambique becomes extremely vulnerable to strong winds, heavy rains, and flooding. And in that way, most of the traditional housing are destroyed, leaving thousands of people without a roof, but moreover, women and girls. If you go to Kiribati, the water level is increasing, putting women at risk of gender-based violence on their, and if you go to Mali and Niger, Sahel as well, the drought is increasing, putting women at risk, etc. The problem of gender on SDG 5 is so big and so interconnected with every part of our life that we don't even know where to start. Dali mentioned the Ukraine war, but all the other conflict from Yemen, Syria, Somalia, Ethiopia, Haiti earthquakes, hospitals are falling down. So if you take the climate change, you take the wars, you take the humanitarian disaster, and you take the pushback and the political polarization, this HLPF is more than timely. The speak up is more than important. We are going to reach the 8 billion point around November. 8 billion people on this planet. And more than ever, that equity is important. Because today, I think Anita and Moira talk about the finance part of it, but today, money costs a lot. Money does not come free anymore. So how can we avoid to waste that resources to make sure to invest it well? Well, we are stronger together, as Gabriela rightly put it. Let's put kids at school. Let's make sure that they don't drop out of school. Let's make sure that there is no unintended pregnancy there. It will cost less to the state, and the state will win into keeping a kid at school. Let's have universal health coverage. We need to continue to talk the talk that we have been doing and all the progress that I've been doing and explain better. Gender transformative is pushing so much debate today that it takes all our effort and energy in all our board to try to convince member states that everybody needs to have a life. Everybody needs a decent life. We should not leave anyone behind. So for me, that's why we need to continue to talk. We need to do what we do. And we are stronger together. Partnership from UN Women to UNDP to all of you. We need to continue exactly what we are doing, the best way we are doing, and do not stop. Because coming from different angles make that happen. But as someone from the field, and I spent all my life on the ground, and I'm just visited all my 6 regions, believe me, women out there that are real leader on their own respect on that ground there, whether they have been to school or not, are so important, doing so fantastic things that is important not to forget that. And honestly, to finishing on what Dali said, I was at the summit for a pre-summit for education in Paris. There was no many young people because of that. And as we said today, that's one of the solutions we should be for the bigger summit, having for the summit of education, the summit of the future. We should have schools safe, secure, and make sure that they teach the life skills, including comprehensive sexuality education for everyone, everywhere. So let's continue the good fight, as you said yourself, Hélène, because that's the only things to do. And really, I'm so amazed to be among all these beautiful people with bright minds that we thank you for having me here. And with all of you, I thank you for your advocacy, what you do. And just to finish on what Lois said, that is important. It's not even about the UN, the role. It's always about the poorest people. The woman who will not be able from Texas to take the bus to come to New York or to Boston. That's the one who will pay the price. And all the global South say, you see, you people, you say US is the biggest country in the world. That's what they do. Why are you pushing us to do it? So this is the kind of thing we are fighting and we are facing. So let's keep talking, let's speak up, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Deanne. And you used a phrase which we should all adopt: do not stop. We have to be incessant in this campaign. We've got time for each panel member just to give us a minute's reflection. Anything you'd like to say that you didn't get in before, but anything you think will be really helpful to our audience as we think about what must we do. Lois, let me chuck it to you, a minute's reflection.
Well, I am just so inspired by what everyone else offered. I guess the real thing for me, drawing on what Dali said, is around solidarity, right? We truly are all in this together. We say that a lot. And I think we have fumbled at times to truly demonstrate that, but the reality is here we are, and it's sort of a stack of dominoes. So we should absolutely, when we're in the trenches, remember that we have friends all over the world from whom we can draw lessons and support and energy. So thanks again for having me here.
Thanks, Lois. Dali, what about a minute's reflection from you?
Well, I'm extremely inspired by all these leaders and what they shared. I just want to say again that we're stronger together, and when we exchange tools and like lesson learns across borders and across regions, we get stronger faster. And this is all we need to do right now, because our feminist values are threatened every day by these, patriarchal systems, and we need to move fast and together as soon as possible. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dali. Moira, a minute's reflection from you.
I would just say the one thing I say time and again when we're having these conversations around the need for change, and that is take action. We all have the power and the opportunity to be an agent of change. We don't need to be a head of state or a CEO or someone in a traditional position of power. We all have a voice individually, and we also can bring those voices together as a collective. So rather than watching these challenges play out time and time again, use your power.
Yep, fantastic. Use your power. Like these 3-word phrases we're getting. They're very easy to remember and very compelling. Gabriella, a minute's reflection from you.
If we really want to make a change in the world, if we want to build a more inclusive and equal and just planet, we need to guarantee health for all. That's the only way where we are going to be able to develop our abilities, to fulfill our dreams, to build a better planet. I'm sure that if we can place women at the center of all decisions, if we are able to give women a voice, a vote, a say, then we are going to see the changes that we urgently need. If we really believe that the 21st century is going to be the century for women, we have to build it.
Thank you. Deanne, the very last minute to you.
Increase data collection. Work on social norms to activate all feminist CSO everywhere to hold government accountable. Thank you.
Well, I've got my own word cloud out of what our friends have said. Solidarity, we're stronger together. We have to take action. We all can. Use your power. And as Deanne said before, do not stop. So those are the rallying cries from our panel, and I'm going to throw it back to Tikala, our moderator, and thank our great panel for sharing their thoughts and passion with us. Thank you very much.
Helen, I don't know about you, but I was just in awe. I think the panelists we've had have just been amazing and such powerful, inspiring remarks and points that have been made. As you were making your own word cloud, I was tick boxing every single word cloud you had as the same notes I was making. But one key thing that really stood out was that the power that we all have in our different spaces that we work in, that we engage in, whether it's grassroots level or the global level, we all have this power to move the agenda, right? And I think earlier it was mentioned that women have the power to move the world forward. So it really got us thinking and reflecting that, what are we doing with the power we currently have in the spaces that we're at? So, thanks again, Helen, and to the incredible panelists that have shared such important views on what we're talking about today, the importance of women's choice, voice, and autonomy in every sector and development agenda at all levels. So now let us proceed with our closing segment and closing remarks that we have for you by Dr. Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary, Economic Commission for Africa. Dr. Vera Songwe is the Undersecretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. Upon her appointment, she became the first woman to lead the institutions in its 60-year history. And fortunately, due to weather conditions, her flight has been altered and she cannot deliver the remarks in person. But we are grateful to have Dr. Edlam Abere Yemeru, who is the Director for Gender, Poverty and Social Policy Division, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, who will deliver remarks on behalf of Dr. Songwe. Over to you.
Thank you, moderator, and greetings to everyone. Really delighted to be here with you. As indicated, I express to you Dr. Vera Songwe's regrets that she couldn't join you. So on her behalf, let me share with you a few closing remarks. And thank you for such inspiring reflections and thoughts. And really, I think the concluding points, Helen, were really fantastic and capture kind of the call to action that's emerging from this conversation. Indeed, I mean, we are at a time of crisis, a time of fragility, and indeed women's choice, voice, and autonomy is once again seriously undermined. But I want to also speak to the fact that as we're going through these crises, women, as they always have, continue to lead, continue to solve, and continue to stand up for each and every one of us. And I really want to acknowledge and celebrate this continued leadership of women who have been at the forefront of helping us to mitigate the impacts of the crises single day in families, in communities, in nations. And so I think it's important to recognize this continued leadership of women at all levels of society that, again, gets us through these waves of crisis and challenge. That's the first point. And I want to celebrate that. And I want to celebrate each and every one of you here who indeed is playing a role in really elevating women across all levels of society, across all agendas and at all levels of society. The next point I want to make is that one of the key strategies that, of course, has been put in place in terms of women leadership is legislation. And I think it's really time to revisit and reconsider legislation and quotas and how effective they have been indeed. I think there's a tendency to hide behind legislation and quotas and assume that this is sufficient in terms of advancing women's leadership, advancing women's political leadership. And it's really critical to unpack what is happening in that space. Is enforcement really happening? Are we really looking at all levels of women's leadership, not just the highest levels, as I said, because women lead at all levels of society? And I think we must also broaden the focus, not just in political leadership, but in the private sector as well. That brings me to my next point, which is really about when it comes to health, how can we elevate women in the global healthcare industry as decision makers, as consumers, and as entrepreneurs? We know that the global healthcare industry is worth $8 to $9 trillion. And so where are women in this space? Where are women in terms of the corporate boards that are in this sector? And how is it that we can enable women-owned businesses, enterprises, and entrepreneurs to benefit from this massive sector and really become part of those that are benefiting from this huge industry? The other point that I'd like to make and emphasize is that as we talk about health, we need to continue to be vocal and very loud around the need to address women's financial exclusion. It's not a new agenda, but it remains a crucial focus that we must continue to look at, continue to advocate, because we have seen that even during the recent crises, women's financial exclusion further, and that then in turn elevated their vulnerability and fragility under the current crises that we are experiencing. And so, as I said at the beginning, indeed, a lot of fragility and vulnerability, but women continue to lead, continue to act. And it is this very force that we need to continue to mobilize, we need to continue to network and connect. And as we mobilize and strategize, of course, it remains absolutely critical to address the very real and pervasive cultural, institutional, and legislative barriers that exist, even as women, every day, in every sphere of life, and at all levels of society, continue to deliver development for us, continue to deliver resilience for us, continue to help each of us, our households, our families, our societies, our countries. Truly, these barriers persist, and these are the barriers that we need to continue to tackle and really to address. And so I want to thank all of you for inviting the ECA, Dr. Vera Songway, to this conversation. I want to reiterate to you that certainly we stand in solidarity with all of you. We stand to act with all of you. And certainly we will not stop, and we are not stopping at ECA in terms of our work to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the African continent. We have a number of initiatives, a number of exciting projects, and therefore we look to working with all of you really from a global perspective in this respect. So let me end by saying that empowering women is really empowering all of us in society. This is what we stand for. This is the message we continue to put out there. And this is really what we hope to move towards in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yamiru, for delivering those remarks on behalf of Dr. Songwes, but of course, even adding a bit more reflections on, what we've heard today. Dr. Yamiru, you raised some key points that, we really need to be acting on, that we need to continue engaging on, especially on the culture, institution, and legislative barriers that continue to rise against a lot of these issues around women's leadership and issues around women's voices and autonomy in key spaces. I want to take this moment to just say thank you to each and every one of the speakers we've had today. Very powerful voices that have been shared in our discussion at this event. Key things each and every one of us can take back in whatever spaces we're at and take it forward and act on it and take action. And I love the way it was earlier put it to say that, together in partnership, what can we do to advance the key issues and agenda that has been discussed today? So as we're closing off our event today, I want to turn it back to our amazing audience and those that have been part of this key discussion, listening in, sharing your comments and your questions as the panelists were speaking as well. But one thing after we have these discussions, after we have these events, we're always asking, so, what's next, right? What are we going to do after this key discussion, key points that have been raised? And I want to throw it to our audience to kind of hear from them, right? And the question that I have, in one word, what transformative action would be needed to ensure women not only have a seat, but a voice at the table? I'm going to repeat that question again. In one word, what transformative action would be needed to ensure women not only have a seat, but a voice at the table? I see some amazing things coming in: equity, solidarity, use of power, listen, collaboration, vote. There's definitely some of the key things that the panelists were also sharing on here: commitment, inclusion, involvement, support, respect, loving, accountability. I think this has been amazing. And just hearing even from the perspective of those who have been part of this discussion is really incredible. And as you can see, that accountability has been one of those key words that have stood out in the word cloud that we just had. And, when we think about all these global commitments, regional commitments, national commitments that are being made on issues around women's leadership and gender equality, there isn't enough that we're doing to enforce these commitments and to hold leaders accountable. And we definitely have a lot more to do on accountability, but together we can. So on that note, I once again would like to thank each and every one of you for your valuable inputs from the panelists and the speakers and those who have joined us today. A lot can be done and must be done. Working in partnership together, we can truly make a difference for all women and girls in supporting women's political leadership. We'll build a fairer, more equal, and better world for everyone. But before we go, as promised, we did say we have an incredible poem that will be presented as a closing. So exactly a year ago, on the 13th of July, 2021, Mumbi Macharia, a spoken word poet from Kenya, addressed world leaders with a poem. Now this year, she looks back at a year and asks world leaders and each of us, what have we done? Let us listen to Mumbi, who says, I was born to write and perform poetry, and she is so much more. So over to you as Mumbi Macharia gives us the closing in a powerful spoken word poem. Thank you.
She came from Nairobi, Kabul, Texas. And at no point before you signed the dotted line in ink did you stop to ask her what she thinks. We are angry, and rightfully so. Our hearts are heavy, so please don't take us lightly. They say you're on the menu if you're not seated at the table. Does this sound familiar? We are running out of time, so if you deny us the freedom we deserve, we'll just find a way to take it. And this table that you refuse to invite us to, it's time we started to shake it. We chanted, her body, her choice, but it was your pen and your voice. Her body is so much more than just a canvas for policy. Why is her autonomy something you time and time again omit? Why are you policing our bodies for crimes they did not commit? Love is a verb as much as it is a noun. And unless my sisters are in the room, we won't be left with so much as the right to a pronoun. The dominoes are falling, and I'm scared of what else they'll hit on their way down. See, ever since I was an adolescent, and even before that, you taught me that every successful man has a woman behind him, never beside him. So let me now remind him that he never actually intended on giving the woman a platform so she can shine. He thought it would be enough to just give her airtime for some time. It's time we face it. We can no longer give you any more of our time just so that you can waste it. So to reiterate, in exchange for my vote, I don't want notes. I just want change. We're tired of this dance. 2 steps forward, 50 years back. I am young, a woman, and Black, so you can imagine. Everything that my freedom is hanging on to is under attack. I want to live my life to the fullest. So understand that asking a woman why she didn't just close her legs makes about as much sense as asking a man who's been shot why he didn't try to catch the bullet. So I want little girls everywhere to know that among her sisters and her brothers, there is no one who is more equal than another.